At his second wedding reception, he spotted her, his pregnant ex-wife, wiping tables with shaking hands. My most precious, deeply respected, and endlessly loved family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Every single one of you means more to me than words could ever hold. With every story, you give me life, and with every moment you spend here, you give this space meaning. Our bond is not ordinary. It's soul deep, heart strong, and forever real. To all my new family members, please don't leave at the beginning. Trust the journey, stay till the end. Let the story reach you the way it has touched so many before you. To my loyal angels who have been here from the beginning, I need you now more than ever. Share in the comments how much this family means to you so others can feel what we've built. Don't wait for me to ask. If this voice still holds a place in your heart, like, comment, and let the world feel your presence. Say it proudly with all your love. I am here. Our next milestone is 30,000 family members, and I believe in us. Slowly, gently, we will get there, not with numbers, but with hearts. Now my prayer for you, written with love and tears. May your heart be held by peace, your soul kissed by light, and your life surrounded by people who value you, respect you, and never let you feel alone. May your days be softer, and your nights filled with calm and deep love. This isn't just storytelling. This is where healing lives. This is family. This is home. If you're feeling it too, say it with grace and pride. I am here. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting golden streaks across the marble kitchen island where Nikia Williams sat sketching architectural plans. Her dark skin glowed in the natural light, and her braids were pulled back in the neat bun she always wore when concentrating on her designs. Henry Asa watched her from the doorway, still amazed after 3 years of marriage that this brilliant, beautiful woman had chosen to build a life with him. The Morrison project is going to be stunning, Nikia murmured without looking up, her pencil dancing across the blueprint. A sustainable community center that actually serves the community. Imagine that. Henry moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You're going to change the world, one building at a time. She leaned back into his embrace, her hand finding his. We're going to change the world. Your tech innovations funding my sustainable designs? We're unstoppable, Mr. Acer. Mrs. Acer, he corrected, spinning her chair around to face him. And speaking of building our future, Nikia's eyes lit up with hope and anticipation. They'd been trying for a baby for 8 months now, and every month brought the same cycle of hope and disappointment. But they never stopped dreaming, never stopped planning for the family they would create together. Dr. Evangeline Rothwell called, Henry said softly, watching her expression carefully. The fertility consultation is scheduled for next week. Are you nervous? Nikia asked, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest through his white dress shirt. With you? Never. Henry captured her hand and brought it to his lips. Whatever it takes, whatever we need to do. I want to see you holding our baby, Nikia. I want to watch you become the incredible mother I know you'll be. Tears sparkled in her eyes, happy tears, full of love and possibility. I love you so much, Henry. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we're real. They held each other in the kitchen of their dream home, sunlight warming their skin, completely unaware that their perfect life was already cracking at the foundation. Dawn Schmitz arrived at Nikia's architecture firm that afternoon with her usual dramatic flair, designer heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. She'd been Nikia's best friend since their freshman year at Columbia and now served as her business partner and the firm's head of client relations. Where Nikia was thoughtful and precise, Dawn was bold and persuasive, a perfect complement that had built their company into one of the most sought-after architectural firms in the city. Girl, you look radiant today, Dawn said. settling into the chair across from Nikia's desk. That marriage glow is still going strong, I see. Nikia smiled, not catching the slight edge in Dawn's voice. Henry and I were just talking about expanding our family. I swear, sometimes I think I might burst from happiness. Something flickered across Dawn's face, too quick for Nikia to notice, but unmistakably painful. Dawn had harbored feelings for Henry since college, feelings that had never been reciprocated but never fully died. Watching her best friend live the life she'd always wanted was excruciating. "That's wonderful," Dawn managed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You two deserve all the happiness in the world." They worked together for the next few hours, reviewing client proposals and discussing upcoming projects. But as the afternoon wore on, Dawn found herself studying Nikia, the way she unconsciously touched her stomach when talking about children, the way her face lit up whenever Henry texted her, the way she seemed to glow with contentment. It was that contentment that Dawn couldn't stand. It was the knowledge that Nikia had everything Dawn had ever wanted, seemingly without even trying. And it was the growing realization that Henry would never look at anyone else the way he looked at his wife. That evening, while Nikia worked, late on the Morrison project, Dawn sat in her luxury apartment overlooking Central Park, glass of wine in hand, scrolling through social media. Every photo of Henry and Nikia together was like a knife twist in her chest. Their anniversary trip to Santorini, Henry surprising Nikia with a rooftop garden for her birthday, Nikia's glowing face at their company's annual gala, Henry's arm around her waist, like he was afraid someone might steal her away. Dawn had been there first. She'd met Henry at a tech conference 2 years before Nikia even knew he existed. They talked for hours about innovation, about changing the world, about their dreams for the future. Dawn had thought they had a connection, had believed that their shared ambition and vision meant something. But then Henry had met Nikia at the charity fundraiser Dawn had organized, and everything changed. He'd taken one look at Nikia's passion for sustainable design, heard her speak about building communities rather than just buildings, and Dawn had watched him fall in love in real time. She'd stood by and smiled as Henry courted Nikia with the intensity of a man who'd found his purpose. She'd been the maid of honor at their wedding, had given a speech about true love and best friends, all while her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. And now, 3 years later, she was still pretending to be happy for them while dying inside. Dawn set down her wine glass and picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Marcus Blackwell, a private investigator she'd used for particularly difficult clients. Marcus specialized in finding dirt when dirt needed to be found. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. But as she thought about Nikia's radiant smile, about Henry's obvious adoration, about the baby they were trying to have, something cold and desperate crystallized in her chest. She dialed the number. "Marcus, it's Dawn Schmitz. I need you to dig up some information on someone close to me." She paused, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. "I need you to find me something I can use." 3 weeks later, Henry sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of Acer Technologies, staring at the manila envelope that had been delivered to his personal assistant that morning. His name was written across the front in neat block letters. No return address, no indication of who had sent it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, delivered by an anonymous courier. Nikia entering a downtown hotel. Nikia in what appeared to be intimate conversation with a tall, handsome man Henry didn't recognize. Nikia's hand on the man's arm as they walked through the lobby. Nikia kissing the man's cheek outside the hotel entrance. Henry's world tilted sideways. His hands shook as he spread the photos across his mahogany desk, searching for some explanation. some context that would make sense of what he was seeing. But the photos told a story he couldn't deny, couldn't explain away. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I thought you should know. Someone who cares about you." Henry stared at the message, then at the photos, then out the window at the city that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. The woman he'd trusted with his entire heart, the woman he'd planned to grow old with, the woman he wanted to mother his children. She was betraying him. He thought about all the late nights she'd claimed to be working, all the project meetings she'd said ran long, all the times she'd come home exhausted, claiming the stress of deadlines was wearing her down. Henry's chest felt like it was caving in. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of love, 3 years of building a life together, and it was all a lie. When Nikia came home that evening, glowing with excitement about a new project proposal, Henry was waiting for her in the living room with the photos spread across the coffee table. "Henry?" Nikia's voice was confused, concerned. "What's wrong? You look..." "Don't." Henry's voice was ice cold, unfamiliar even to himself. "Don't lie to me anymore." Nikia's eyes fell to the photographs, and the color drained from her face. "Henry, I can explain..." "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been cheating on me while we've been trying to have a baby together." Henry stood, his tall frame towering over her. "Explain how you could look me in the eye every morning and tell me you love me while you were doing this. Those photos aren't what they look like," Nikia pleaded, reaching for him. "If you would just listen..." "I trusted you with everything," Henry said, stepping away from her touch. "I gave you my heart, my home, my future. I planned to grow old with you, Nikia. I wanted you to be the mother of my children." Tears streamed down Nikia's face. "I am that woman, Henry. I am exactly that woman. Please, just let me explain what those photos really show. I want a divorce." The words fell from Henry's lips, like stones into still water, creating ripples that would destroy everything they'd built together. "I want you out of my house, out of my company, out of my life." Nikia's sob echoed through the penthouse, raw and broken. "Henry, please, I love you. I have never loved anyone but you. Those photos, someone is trying to hurt us. Can't you see that?" But Henry was already walking toward their bedroom, already planning his escape from the woman who had shattered his world. He couldn't see past the betrayal, couldn't hear past the lies, couldn't feel anything but the devastating pain of discovering that the woman he'd trusted most had destroyed him completely. Behind him, Nikia collapsed onto the sofa, clutching one of the photographs with shaking hands. In the picture, she was hugging her cousin James outside the hotel where they'd met to discuss surprising Henry with a renovation of his childhood home for their anniversary. The kiss on the cheek was familial, innocent, meaningless, but Henry was already gone, and the truth would remain locked in her heart as their perfect life crumbled around them. Chapter 2. 6 months of silence. 6 months had passed since Henry filed for divorce, and the papers were finalized with a cold efficiency that broke Nikia's heart all over again. She sat in the cramped bathroom of her studio apartment, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines stared back at her, clear and undeniable. Pregnant. The baby they had tried so hard for, the child they had dreamed about during late-night conversations and lazy Sunday mornings, was finally growing inside her. But Henry was gone, believing she had betrayed him, and she was alone in a way that felt soul-crushing. Nikia slid down the bathroom wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, the test still clutched in her hands. She should call him. She should tell him about the baby that had been conceived in their last week together, before the photos, before the accusations, before their world fell apart. But the memory of his voice that last night, so cold, so final, echoed. In her mind, "I want you out of my life." How could she tell him about the baby when he had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her? How could she force herself back into his world when he had looked at her with such disgust, such betrayal? The man who had once promised to love her forever had discarded her like she meant nothing. Nikia pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and made a decision that would haunt her for months to come. She would not tell Henry about the baby. She would protect this child from the kind of rejection and pain she had experienced. She would find a way to build a life for them both, even if it meant doing it completely alone. Across town, Henry stood in the penthouse that had once been their home, staring at the empty spaces where Nikia's belongings used to be. Her architectural drawings were gone from the walls. Her plants no longer lined the windowsills. Her coffee cup, the one with the chip on the handle that she refused to throw away, was missing from the kitchen sink where it had lived every morning for 3 years. Dawn stood beside him, her manicured hand resting on his arm in what she meant to be a comforting gesture. She'd been there for him through every awful day of the divorce proceedings, listening to his pain, offering support, slowly becoming the one constant in his shattered world. "You're better off without her," Dawn said softly, her voice full of sympathy. "I know it doesn't feel that way now, but Henry, you deserve someone who will be faithful to you, someone who won't betray your trust." Henry nodded, though his chest still felt hollow. "I just can't understand how I got it so wrong. 3 years, Dawn. 3 years I thought I knew her." Dawn's heart raced as she saw her opening. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the best at hiding who they really are. But Henry, you'll find love again, real love, the kind that's honest and true." She had been planting these seeds for months, carefully positioning herself as his confidant, his support system, his potential future. And slowly, it was working. Henry was beginning to lean on her, to trust her, to see her as more than just Nikia's friend. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again," Henry admitted, running his hands through his hair. "How do you build something with someone when you know how easily it can all be destroyed?" "You start with friendship," Dawn said, stepping closer to him. "You start with someone who has already proven they care about you, who has been here through your worst moments." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Someone like me." Henry looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since his world had fallen apart. Dawn was beautiful, successful, loyal. She had been there for him when everyone else had failed him. Maybe she was right. Maybe friendship was the foundation for something real. "Dawn," he said slowly, "I don't want to hurt you. I don't know if I'm capable of love anymore." "Let me worry about that," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Let me take care of you, Henry. You've been through enough pain." When she kissed him, Henry didn't pull away. It felt safe, familiar, uncomplicated. Nothing like the passionate, all-consuming love he had shared with Nikia, but maybe that was better. Maybe passion led to pain, and safety was what he needed now. 3 months later, Nikia stood in the uniform of Prestige Catering Services, adjusting the black polo shirt that was becoming tighter around her growing belly. She had lost her architectural firm when the divorce settlement left her with almost nothing. Henry's lawyers had been ruthless, painting her as an unfaithful wife who deserved no claim to their shared business success. The catering job was one of 3 she worked to make ends meet. Mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons cleaning office buildings, evenings serving at high-end events. She was exhausted constantly, but she forced herself to keep moving, to keep working, to keep building a life for the baby growing inside her. Williams called Sofia Castellano, the catering supervisor. "You're on table service tonight, the Sterling Chen wedding. Big money, bigger egos, so smile and be invisible." Nikia nodded, tying her apron around her expanding waist. She had learned to be invisible over the past few months. Invisible to the lawyers who had torn apart her life, invisible to the former clients who had dropped her after rumors of the divorce scandal spread, invisible to the world that had once celebrated her as a rising star in sustainable architecture. As she arranged silverware and folded napkins, Nikia felt the baby kick for the first time. Her hands stilled on the white linen tablecloth, and tears threatened to fall. This little person inside her was the only good thing left from her marriage to Henry, the only piece of their love that had survived the destruction. "You're going to be so loved," she whispered to her belly. "Even if it's just you and me, you're going to be so loved." At that same moment, Henry was in his office, signing papers that would make Dawn Schmitz his fiancée. The proposal had been practical rather than romantic, a decision made with his head rather than his heart. Dawn had suggested it, actually, pointing out that they had been together for 3 months, that they understood each other, that they could build something stable and real. "Are you sure about this?" asked Sterling Pemberton, Henry's lawyer and oldest friend. "It seems fast, even considering everything you've been through." Henry looked at the engagement ring he had chosen. Elegant, expensive, but lacking the personal touches he had put into Nikia's ring 3 years earlier. That ring had been custom designed, incorporating elements that spoke to their shared dreams and inside jokes. This ring was beautiful, but generic, like his feelings for Dawn. "Dawn is good for me," Henry said, trying to convince himself as much as Sterling. "She's been there through everything. She knows who I am, what I've been through. There won't be any surprises." "But do you love her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Henry thought about Dawn's laugh, which was pleasant, but never made his heart race. He thought about her kisses, which were nice but never set his soul on fire. He thought about their conversations, which were comfortable but never left him feeling like he had found his other half. "I care about her deeply," Henry said finally. "And maybe that's better than love. Love made me vulnerable. Love made me stupid. Love destroyed me." Sterling nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't convinced. "If you're sure, then I'm happy for you. But Henry, don't marry her just to prove a point. Don't marry her just because it feels safe." But Henry had already made up his mind. Safe was exactly what he wanted. Safe was what would protect him from ever feeling the devastating pain of betrayal again. That evening, Dawn stood in front of her bathroom mirror, holding the pregnancy test she had just taken. Negative, as it had been every month for the past 3. She wasn't actually trying to get pregnant, the opposite in fact. But her plan required Henry to believe she was carrying his child, at least until after the wedding. She had already prepared the fake positive test she would show him tomorrow, purchased from a website that specialized in pregnancy pranks. After they were married, she would fake a miscarriage and comfort Henry through the loss, bonding them together in shared grief. It was manipulative, dishonest, and cruel. But Dawn was past caring about morality. She had watched Henry love Nikia with a devotion that bordered on worship, and she wanted that love for herself. She wanted him to look at her the way he had looked at his wife. She wanted him to choose her the way he had never chosen her before. Dawn practiced her surprised expression in the mirror, rehearsing how she would tell Henry about the pregnancy. She would cry a little, overwhelmed by emotion. She would worry about his reaction, about whether he was ready for this step. She would make it seem real, spontaneous, life-changing. "You deserve this," she told her reflection. "You've loved him longer than she did. You understand him better than she ever could. You're not going to lose him to some fantasy of what they used to have." But as she stared at herself in the mirror, Dawn couldn't shake the image of Nikia's face that last day at the office. Broken, desperate, pleading for someone to believe her innocence. For just a moment, doubt crept into Dawn's carefully constructed justifications, Then she thought about Henry's arms around her, about the ring he had placed on her finger, about the wedding they were planning for 6 months from now. The doubt disappeared, replaced by fierce determination. She had come too, far to turn back now. Whatever it took, whatever lies she had to tell, Henry would be hers. Meanwhile, across the city, Nikia lay in her small bed, one hand resting on her growing belly, completely unaware that the man she still loved with every fiber of her being was planning a future with the woman who had destroyed their marriage. She fell asleep to the sound of rain against her window, dreaming of the family she and Henry had planned to build together, not knowing that in 6 months, their worlds would collide again in the most devastating way possible. Chapter 3. The wedding day collision. The grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel sparkled like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across tables draped in ivory silk, while towers of white roses and gold accents created an atmosphere of understated luxury. Henry Asa stood at the altar in his tailored black tuxedo, watching 200 of the city's elite take their seats for what the society pages were calling the wedding of the year. Dawn looked stunning in her flowing designer gown, all pearl beading and French lace, a vision of classical beauty as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Henry smiled as she approached, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction rather than overwhelming joy. This was right. This was safe. This was the future he had chosen with his head rather than his heart. The ceremony was elegant and proper, with Dawn's carefully chosen vows about partnership and commitment, about building a life based on trust and mutual respect. When Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, he felt relief more than passion. When he kissed his new wife, it was gentle and appropriate, not the soul-searing connection he had once shared with someone else. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Reverend Nathaniel Cross, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Henry Asa." The applause was thunderous as they walked back down the aisle together, Dawn's hand resting possessively on Henry's arm. She had won. After years of wanting him, months of planning, and weeks of careful manipulation, Henry was finally hers. In the hotel's kitchen, Nikia Williams, now working under her maiden name professionally, adjusted her black catering uniform and tried to ignore the dull ache in her lower back. At 7 months pregnant, every shift was becoming more challenging, but she needed the money from this high-profile event. Prestige Catering had landed the contract through Sofia Castellano's connection to the hotel's event coordinator. It was a last-minute substitution when the hotel's preferred caterer had to cancel due to a kitchen fire, and Nikia had volunteered for the overtime despite her condition. Sofia surveyed her team with military precision. "This is the Asa wedding people. The groom owns half the tech companies in this city, and the guest list reads like a who's who of New York society. I want perfect service, invisible staff, and 0 mistakes." Nikia's blood turned to ice at the name Asa. It couldn't be. There had to be other wealthy Asas in the city, other families who could afford the Meridian's premium wedding package. The work assignment had simply listed Asa Schmidt's wedding, and she hadn't made the connection until now, but deep in her heart, she knew. This was Henry's wedding. Henry was marrying Dawn. "Williams, you're on table service in the main ballroom," Sophia continued, consulting her clipboard. "Tables 12 through 20. Keep the champagne flowing and the plates cleared." Nikia nodded numbly, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress, and she took a shaky breath. She could do this. She would keep her head down, do her job, and leave without anyone recognizing her. The Henry Asa she had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had thrown away their love based on lies. She pulled her hair back into a tight bun and adjusted her server's cap, hoping the uniform and different hairstyle would be enough to disguise her. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the confident architect who had once graced magazine covers for her innovative designs. In her place stood a tired, pregnant woman in a catering uniform, invisible to the world that had once celebrated her. The reception was in full swing when Nikia entered the ballroom with her first tray of champagne. The room was magnificent, filled with laughter and conversation, the clink of glasses and soft jazz from the seven-piece orchestra. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, refilling glasses and clearing plates, her eyes carefully averted from the head table where Henry sat with his new wife. But she couldn't help herself from stealing glances. Henry looked older somehow, more serious, his laugh reserved rather than the full-bodied joy she remembered. Dawn, and Nikia's heart clenched as she recognized her former best friend, was radiant in her wedding gown, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious smiles. "Excuse me, miss," called an elderly woman at table 15. "Could I have another glass of the rosé?" "Of course, ma'am," Nikia replied, grateful for the distraction. She focused on her work, on the simple tasks of serving and clearing, trying to ignore the conversations around her about Henry's business success, about how beautiful the couple looked together, about their future plans. "I heard they're planning to start a family right away," giggled a young woman in a pink cocktail dress. "Dawn's always wanted children, and Henry's finally ready to settle down with the right woman." The words hit Nikia like physical blows. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling their child, Henry's child, moving restlessly inside her. He was planning a family with Dawn, while his actual child grew unknown and unwanted just 50 feet away. From across the room, Henry was giving his thank you speech to the guests when something made him pause mid-sentence. A familiar laugh, soft, musical, had carried over the crowd's chatter. He scanned the room, looking for the source, his heart beginning to race for reasons he couldn't understand. Then he saw her. Not her face at first, but her posture. The way she held her shoulders when she was tired, the graceful way she moved. Even while pregnant, it was a silhouette he had memorized during 3 years of marriage, and recognition hit him like lightning. Nikia. His champagne flute slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor with a crash that momentarily silenced nearby conversations. She was pregnant, very pregnant. The black uniform couldn't hide the obvious curve of her belly, the way she moved with the careful balance of a woman in her 3rd trimester. Henry's champagne flute slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor with a crash that momentarily silenced the nearby conversations. "Henry!" Dawn's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Darling, are you all right?" But Henry couldn't hear her. All he could see was Nikia, his ex-wife, pregnant and working as catering staff at his wedding reception. The timing made his head spin. 7 months pregnant meant she had conceived around the time of their divorce. His hands shook as he calculated. Dates, possibilities, implications. The baby could be his. Nikia froze as she heard the crash of breaking glass, some sixth sense making her look up toward the head table. Her eyes met Henry's across the crowded ballroom, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to disappear. 6 months of pain, anger, and heartbreak passed between them in a single, devastating look. Henry's face went white as his gaze dropped to her pregnant belly, then back to her face. She saw the recognition there, the shock, the questions forming in his mind. For a moment, Nikia forgot how to breathe. Then Dawn followed Henry's gaze, her face transforming from confusion to fury as she spotted Nikia among the catering staff. The beautiful bride's expression turned ugly with possessive rage, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the venom in her eyes. "What is she doing here?" Dawn hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The stress of the moment, combined with hours on her feet and the emotional trauma of seeing Henry married to her former best friend, suddenly overwhelmed Nikia's already strained system. The ballroom began to spin, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. She tried to set down the heavy tray, tried to find somewhere to steady herself, but her legs buckled beneath her. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Henry leaping from his chair, his face etched with raw panic and something that looked suspiciously like love. Then she collapsed, her body hitting the marble floor with a sickening thud that echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Chaos erupted instantly. Guests screamed and jumped back as Nikia's unconscious form lay crumpled between the tables, her server's cap knocked askew, her pregnant belly clearly visible beneath the black uniform. Henry was already pushing through the crowd, shoving aside startled wedding guests in his desperate need to reach her. "Call an ambulance!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside Nikia's still form. "Someone call 911! "Sir, please step back," urged Sofia Castellano, trying to maintain some semblance of order. "Let us handle our employee." "She's not just your employee," Henry snapped, his hands hovering over Nikia uncertainly, afraid to touch her but desperate to help. "She's..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. What was she? His ex-wife? The woman he had destroyed? With his lack of trust, the mother of what might be his child? Dawn stood frozen at the head table, her wedding day dissolving into chaos around her. Guests were pulling out phones to record the drama, excited whispers rippling through the crowd. This was supposed to be her perfect day, her triumph, her blame on Henry's heart. Instead, Nikia had appeared like a ghost from their past to destroy everything. "Henry!" Dawn called, her voice sharp with panic. "Henry, come back here. Let the paramedics handle this." But Henry didn't move from Nikia's side. He watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest, noticed how thin she had become except for her pregnancy, saw the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and worry. What had happened to her? How had the successful, vibrant woman he had married become this fragile figure in a catering uniform? The paramedics arrived within minutes, efficiently checking Nikia's vital signs and preparing to transport her to the hospital. Henry hovered beside them, firing questions they couldn't answer. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay? How far along is she?" "Are you family?" asked the lead paramedic, a competent-looking woman with kind eyes. Henry hesitated. Legally, he wasn't family anymore. He had made sure of that during the divorce proceedings. But as he looked at Nikia's pale face, at her hand resting protectively over her belly, even in unconsciousness, he felt a connection he couldn't deny. "I'm her..." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I'm the father," he said quietly. Though he didn't know if it was true, the paramedic nodded and allowed him to ride in the ambulance, leaving Dawn standing in her wedding gown among the wreckage of their reception, her carefully planned future crumbling around her. As the ambulance pulled away from the hotel, sirens wailing, Henry held Nikia's hand and prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in months. He prayed for her recovery, for the baby's safety, and for the strength to face whatever truths this night would reveal. Behind them, the wedding reception had devolved into gossip and speculation. 200 guests with a story they would be telling for years to come. And in the center of it all, Dawn Schmidt stood alone in her designer wedding gown, realizing that despite all her manipulations, all her lies, and all her carefully laid plans, she had never really won Henry's heart. At all. The night that was supposed to be her triumph had become her greatest defeat, and the woman she had destroyed was still somehow the one who mattered most. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The harsh fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital's emergency room cast everything in an unforgiving white glare. Henry sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing his tuxedo from the wedding reception that felt like a lifetime ago. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, his jacket wrinkled from hours of anxious movement, his hands stained with the champagne that had spilled when his world shifted off its axis. It had been 3 hours since the ambulance brought Nikia in. 3 hours of pacing, of demanding answers from busy medical staff, of trying to process the impossible situation he found himself in. His wedding day had ended not with dancing and celebration, but with his pregnant ex-wife collapsing at his reception. Mr. Asa, Dr. Evangeline Rothwell emerged from the treatment area, her expression professional but kind. Henry recognized her. She had been their fertility specialist during the marriage, the doctor who had guided them through months of hoping and trying for the child they both desperately wanted. How is she? Henry stood immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs. How's the baby? Dr. Rothwell's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Williams is stable. She suffered from severe dehydration and exhaustion, but we've got her on IV fluids, and she's responding well. The baby appears to be fine. Strong heartbeat, normal movement. However, I need to discuss some concerns about her overall health. What? A kind of concerns? Henry felt his blood turn cold. She's undernourished and clearly overworked. Her blood pressure is elevated, and she's showing signs of chronic stress. This isn't good for her or the baby. Dr. Rothwell studied Henry carefully. Are you the father? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Henry thought about the timing, about the last passionate nights he and Nikia had shared before their world exploded. I think so, I hope so. I don't know for certain. In the waiting room, Dawn sat rigidly in her wedding dress, the elaborate beading and lace now feeling like a costume for a play that had ended badly. Her mother, Catherine Schmitz, sat beside her, periodically offering tissues and consoling words that Dawn barely heard. Darling, perhaps we should go home, Catherine suggested gently. You've had such a shock and this whole situation is just... I'm not leaving. Dawn's voice was flat, emotionless. Not until I know what's happening. What was happening was that her perfect wedding day had been destroyed by the woman she had worked so hard to eliminate from Henry's life. Seeing Nikia pregnant, seeing Henry's immediate and desperate concern for her, had shattered Dawn's illusions about their marriage before it had even truly begun. She thought about the fake pregnancy test hidden in her purse, the lie she had been planning to reveal on their honeymoon. The irony was almost laughable. She had fabricated a pregnancy to bind Henry to her, while his real ex-wife was actually carrying what might be his child. Mrs. Asa? A different doctor approached, looking tired. I understand your husband is with Mrs. Williams. The title felt foreign and wrong in Dawn's ears. Mrs. Asa. She had fought so hard for that name, had manipulated and lied to claim it, and now it felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Yes, she managed. He's concerned about her condition. The doctor nodded sympathetically. It's understandable. Pregnancy complications can be frightening, especially when there are pre-existing relationships involved. Dawn wanted to scream that there were no pre-existing relationships, that Henry was her husband now, that Nikia had no claim on him. But the words stuck in her throat because she had seen Henry's face when he spotted Nikia in the ballroom. She had seen the raw emotion there, the immediate protective instinct, the love that he had never quite managed to feel for her. Henry was allowed into Nikia's room after she had been moved to a private ward. She looked so small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and IV lines, her dark skin ashy with exhaustion. But she was awake, her eyes alert and wary as he approached. "Hi," he said softly, unsure how to begin a conversation with the woman. He had divorced, the woman he had blamed for destroying their marriage, the woman who was apparently carrying his child. "Hi," Nikia replied, her voice hoarse. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, and Henry found his eyes drawn to the obvious curve beneath the hospital gown. They stared at each other for a long moment. 6 months of pain and misunderstanding, stretching between them like a chasm. Finally, Henry found his voice. When? He asked simply. Nikia knew what he was asking. I found out a few days after the divorce was finalized. She was conceived during our last week together. Her voice was matter of fact, but Henry could hear the underlying hurt. Before the photos, before you decided I was a liar and a cheat. Henry felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Why didn't you tell me? Because you made it very clear. You wanted me out of your life. Nikia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Because you looked at me like I was something disgusting that last night. Because I wasn't going to force my child on someone who hated her mother. I don't hate you, Henry said quickly, then stopped. Did he? For months, he had told himself he hated her, had nursed his anger and betrayal like a wounded animal licking its wounds. But seeing her here, vulnerable and alone, carrying his child while he had been planning a future with someone else, he wasn't sure what he felt anymore. You divorced me based on photographs you wouldn't let me explain, Nikia said quietly. You chose to believe the worst of me rather than trust the woman you claimed to love. So tell me, Henry, if you don't hate me, what do you call that? Outside in the hallway, Dawn sat rigidly in her wedding dress, having followed the ambulance to the hospital despite Henry's departure. The nursing staff had refused her access to any information about Nikia's condition. She wasn't family, had no legal right to updates. But she could see through the partially open door, could hear fragments of conversation that made her carefully constructed world crumble. The sight of Henry's obvious anguish over his ex-wife, the way he had abandoned their wedding reception, without a second thought, the recognition that Nikia was carrying what might be his child, it all crashed over Dawn like a wave. When Henry emerged from Nikia's room an hour later, his face haggard with worry and guilt, Dawn was waiting. The weight of seeing him choose Nikia again, even unconsciously, even in crisis, broke something fundamental inside her. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. Then the words poured out like a dam bursting. I'm not pregnant, Henry. I never was. I've been lying about everything. The pregnancy test, the doctor visits, all of it. I was planning to fake a miscarriage after our honeymoon. Dawn pushed open the door to Nikia's room, her wedding dress rustling against the doorframe. Both Henry and Nikia looked up in surprise, the intimate moment between them shattered by her presence. I need to talk to you, Dawn said, her voice shaking. She looked directly at Henry, ignoring Nikia's presence. Both of you. Henry stood, confusion and irritation warring on his face. Dawn, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Dawn interrupted, her hands trembling as she reached into her purse. She pulled out the fake pregnancy test, the one she had planned to use to bind Henry to her forever, and set it on the bedside table. I'm not pregnant, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I never was. I bought this online. I was going to show it to you on our honeymoon and then fake a miscarriage later. The silence in the room was deafening. Henry stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language, while Nikia's eyes widened with shock and growing understanding. What are you saying? Henry's voice was barely a whisper. Dawn took a shaky breath, knowing that what she said next would destroy everything, but unable to stop herself. The sight of Henry's obvious love for Nikia, the recognition that she would never be more than a placeholder in his heart, had broken something inside her. I'm saying that I lied about everything, the pregnancy, the affair, all of it. She looked at Nikia for the first time, seeing the exhausted woman she had helped to destroy. Those photographs of you with a man? That was your cousin James. I hired a private investigator to follow you, and when we couldn't find anything real, I took pictures out of context and made them look like something they weren't. Henry sank into the chair beside Nikia's bed, his face white with shock. You're lying. I wish I was. Dawn was crying now, her carefully applied wedding makeup running down her cheeks in black streams. I forged emails. I bribed mutual friends to lie about seeing you with other men. I created an entire fiction because I couldn't stand watching Henry love you the way I wanted him to love me." Nikia made a small sound of pain, not physical but emotional, the sound of someone having their worst fears confirmed. "You destroyed my marriage because you were jealous. I destroyed your marriage because I loved him first." Dawn's voice cracked with years of suppressed emotion. "I met him before you did. I thought we had a connection. But then you walked into that charity fundraiser with your brilliant ideas and your passion for changing the world, and he never looked at anyone else again." Henry stood slowly, his movements mechanical, like a man in shock. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months. I've been believing that the woman I loved betrayed me. 6 months I've been hating myself for being such a fool. 6 months I've been trying to build something new while mourning something I thought was destroyed by lies. "It was destroyed by lies," Dawn whispered, "just not hers." The revelation hung in the room like a toxic cloud. Henry looked between the two women, his new wife, who had just confessed to destroying his previous marriage, and his ex-wife, who was carrying his child and had been innocent all along. "I need air," Henry said suddenly, heading for the door. "I need to think. I need to—" He stopped, looking back at Nikia. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" The question was so simple, so caring, that it brought fresh tears to Nikia's eyes. "I'm okay," she whispered. "The baby's okay." Henry nodded and left, leaving Dawn and Nikia alone together for the first time since the divorce. Dawn sat heavily in the chair Henry had vacated, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know, that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." Nikia studied her former best friend, the woman who had been her confidant and business partner, the woman who had destroyed her life out of jealousy and obsession. Why now? Why tell the truth now? Dawn was quiet for a long moment, because I realized that even if I kept the lie going, even if we stayed married, he would never love me the way he loved you. I would spend my entire life knowing I was his second choice, his consolation prize, and you would spend your life believing you had lost him because you weren't worth fighting for. She stood, smoothing down her wedding dress. I destroyed 2 people I claimed to love because I couldn't stand not being chosen. But Henry did choose. He chose you 3 years ago, and he chose you again tonight when he rode in that ambulance instead of staying with his bride. Dawn moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you can forgive him. He made a mistake trusting me over you, but he made it out of love. He loved you so much that my lies felt like the end of the world to him." And with that, Dawn Schmitz walked out of the hospital room, out of their lives, leaving behind the wreckage of her deception and the faint possibility that something real might rise from the ashes of her lies. Chapter 5. The Weight of Truth. Henry found himself on the hospital's rooftop garden, a small oasis of green in the concrete jungle of the city. The night air was cool against his skin, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital room he had just fled. His tuxedo felt like a costume from a play he no longer understood, and he loosened his collar, trying to breathe through the crushing weight of Dawn's confession. Everything he had believed for the past 6 months was Nikia hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't cheated on him. She hadn't looked him in the eye every morning for months while carrying on an affair behind his back. The woman he had loved with every fiber of his being had been innocent, and he had destroyed their marriage based on fabricated evidence and his own paranoid fears. Henry sank onto a stone bench, putting his head in his hands as the full magnitude of his mistake crashed over him. He had called her a liar. He had demanded a divorce without letting her explain. He had chosen to believe the worst of her rather than trust the love they had built together over 3 years. And while he had been building a new life with the woman who had destroyed his old one, Nikia had been struggling alone, pregnant with his child, working multiple jobs just to survive. The successful architect he had married was now serving champagne at other people's weddings while carrying his baby. The memories came flooding back with cruel clarity. The night he had confronted Nikia with the photographs, the way her face had crumpled when she saw them, the desperate way she had pleaded for him to listen to her explanation. "Those photos aren't what they look like," she had said, reaching for him with trembling hands. "If you would just listen." But he hadn't listened. He had been so consumed by rage and betrayal that he had refused to hear her side of the story. He had walked away from their bedroom that night and slept in his office, unable to bear looking at her face. The divorce proceedings had been swift and brutal. Henry's lawyers had painted Nikia as an unfaithful wife who deserved nothing from their shared assets. They had frozen the accounts for her architecture firm, making it impossible for her to operate her business. They had systematically dismantled the life she had built, leaving her with almost nothing, and Henry had let them do it. He had told himself she deserved it for betraying him, that he was protecting himself from further manipulation. Now he realized he had been the one manipulated by Dawn's carefully crafted lies into destroying the most precious thing in his life. His phone buzzed with a text from Sterling Pemberton, his lawyer and friend who had been at the wedding reception. "Heard about the drama at the reception. Are you okay? What do you need from me?" Henry stared at the message, thinking about all the times Sterling had questioned his decision to divorce Nikia so quickly. "It seems fast," Sterling had said. "Are you sure you're seeing the whole picture?" But Henry had been so certain, so convinced of Nikia's guilt, that he had dismissed Sterling's concerns as naive optimism. Now he wondered what his life might have looked like if he had listened to his friend's advice, if he had taken time to investigate the photographs more thoroughly, if he had trusted his wife instead of his wounded pride. He typed back, "I need you to reverse everything we did in the divorce. Every account freeze, every asset seizure, every legal action. I need you to make sure Nikia gets everything she's entitled to and more." Sterling's response was immediate. "What happened?" "I destroyed an innocent woman's life based on lies," Henry typed, "and I need to find a way to make it right." Back in the hospital room, Nikia lay in the darkness, her hand resting on her belly as she felt the baby moving restlessly inside her. The confrontation with Dawn had left her emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. For 6 months, she had carried the weight of Henry's accusations, the knowledge that the man she loved believed her capable of betrayal. Now she knew the truth, that his lack of trust hadn't been based on anything real, but on carefully constructed lies designed to destroy their marriage. It didn't excuse his refusal to listen to her explanations, but it explained the devastation in his eyes that last night, the way he had looked at her like she was a stranger. "Are you all right, Miss Williams?" asked Dr. Rothwell, entering the room to check on her patient. "Your heart rate is elevated." "I'm processing some difficult news," Nikia said quietly. "The baby's father just learned that our marriage ended because of someone else's lies." Dr. Rothwell nodded sympathetically. "That must be overwhelming for both of you. Are you concerned about his reaction to the pregnancy?" Nikia considered the question. "I don't know what to expect anymore. For months, I've been preparing to raise this child alone. Now everything's changed, but I don't know if it's changed enough to matter." "What would matter to you?" the doctor asked gently. "Trust," Nikia said without hesitation. "The ability to believe that he won't abandon us again the moment someone plants doubt in his mind. This baby deserves a father who will fight for her, not someone who will walk away when things get complicated." Dr. Rothwell squeezed her hand. "That's a reasonable expectation. And for what it's worth, I've seen the way he's been pacing these halls tonight. Whatever mistakes he made in the past, his concern for you and the baby Seems genuine. Henry returned to find Nikia's room dark, except for the soft glow of monitoring equipment. He knocked softly on the doorframe, and she turned toward the sound. "Come in," she said quietly. He approached the bed cautiously, unsure of his welcome, after everything that had transpired. "I brought you something," he said, setting a bag from the hospital gift shop on the bedside table. "Comfortable clothes for when you're discharged. I thought the catering uniform might not be. I thought you might want something else to wear." The small kindness brought tears to Nikia's eyes. "Thank you." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Finally, Henry found his voice. "I failed you," he said simply. "In every way a husband can fail his wife. I failed you. I didn't trust you. I didn't protect you. I didn't fight for us when our marriage was under attack." Nikia studied his face. "In the dim light, why didn't you let me explain about the photographs?" Henry closed his eyes, remembering that awful night. "Because I was terrified. Because losing you was the worst thing I could imagine, and if I let you explain, I might have to face the possibility that you were telling the truth, and I was destroying us for nothing. So, you chose to believe the worst instead? I chose to rip the bandage off quickly rather than die a slow death, wondering if you loved me or if you were just a very good actress." Henry's voice broke. "I thought it would hurt less to hate you than to live in uncertainty." "But you didn't hate me," Nikia observed. "You married Dawn." Henry ran his hands through his hair. "I married Dawn because she felt safe. Because she didn't make me feel like my heart was going to explode every time she walked into a room. Because I thought loving someone less would mean hurting less if I lost them." "And did it work?" Henry looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the exhaustion in her eyes, the defensive way she held her body, the protective hand over their child. "No, it just meant I was living half a life while you were struggling alone with our baby." Nikia shifted in the hospital bed, trying to find a comfortable position. "What happens now, Henry? Dawn confessed to destroying our marriage, but that doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't erase the fact that when I needed you to trust me, you chose to believe lies instead." "I know," Henry said quietly. "I know I can't undo what I did to you, to us. But Nikia, I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've learned from my mistakes. I'm asking for the opportunity to be the father our daughter deserves." "Our daughter?" Nikia's voice was soft with surprise. "If you'll let me be. If you think I can earn the right to be part of her life." Henry leaned forward slightly. "I know I have no claim on you anymore. I know I destroyed any right I had to your love or your trust. But this baby is innocent of my mistakes, and she deserves to have a father who will love her unconditionally." Nikia felt the baby kick at the sound of Henry's voice, as if she was already responding to her father. "She moves whenever you talk," she said softly. "Even in the womb, she seems to know you." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "Can I? Would it be all right if I—" Nikia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Henry moved his chair closer to the bed and gently placed his hand on her belly. Almost immediately, the baby kicked again, her tiny foot pressing against his palm through Nikia's skin. "She's strong," Henry whispered, wonder in his voice. "She has to be," Nikia replied. "She's going to be born into a complicated situation." Henry kept his hand on her belly, feeling his daughter move beneath his touch. "What's complicated about two parents who love her and want the best for her?" "The fact that those two parents don't trust each other anymore," Nikia said honestly. "The fact that one of them destroyed their relationship and the other one learned to live without him. They stayed like that for a long time." Henry's hand on Nikia's belly, feeling their daughter move and kick. It was intimate and painful and hopeful all at once, a glimpse of what their life might have been like if Dawn's lies hadn't torn them apart. "I dream about her sometimes," Nikia said softly, "about what she'll look like, what kind of person she'll become. In my dreams, she has your eyes and your stubborn streak. In my dreams, she has your heart and your brilliant mind." Henry replied, "Though I only just started having those dreams tonight." "What changed tonight?" Henry looked at her, his expression raw with emotion. "Tonight I realized that I've been sleepwalking through the last 6 months. Tonight, I remembered what it felt like to care about someone more than I care about protecting myself from being hurt." Nikia absorbed this, feeling the truth of it in the way his hand trembled slightly against her skin. "I'm scared, Henry." "Of what?" "Of hoping again, of letting myself believe that maybe we could find our way back to each other, of trusting you. With our daughter's future, when you proved you could walk away from us." Henry nodded, understanding her fear completely. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that I've damaged us too badly to repair. I'm scared that you'll never be able to forgive me, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Dawn's confession had shattered the foundation of everything Henry thought he knew about the past. 6 months, but it had also opened a door to a future he had thought was lost forever. As he sat beside Nikia's hospital bed, feeling his daughter kick against his palm, he realized that the hardest part wouldn't be learning to trust again. It would be proving that he deserved to be trusted. The weight of truth was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time in 6 months, Henry wasn't living a lie. He wasn't pretending to love someone he didn't, wasn't building a future on false foundations, wasn't trying to convince himself that safe was better than real. He was exactly where he belonged, beside the woman who had always been his other half, feeling the movement of the child they had created together, facing an uncertain but honest future. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. Love, once damaged, required careful tending to heal. But as their daughter kicked against his hand, as if blessing this tentative reconnection, Henry allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, some mistakes could be forgiven and some damage could be repaired. The truth had set them free from Dawn's lies, but now they had to discover if they could find their way back to each other. Chapter 6. Desperate Attempts. 2 weeks had passed since the wedding night revelation, and Henry felt like a man trying to solve an impossible equation. How do you apologize for destroying someone's life? How do you rebuild trust when you've proven yourself unworthy of it? How do you earn forgiveness when your mistakes have caused months of suffering? He had started small, or what he thought was small. The morning after Nikia was discharged from the hospital, Henry had the most beautiful flower arrangement delivered to her tiny studio apartment. White roses and baby's breath, the same flowers she had carried at their wedding 3 years ago. They came back that afternoon with a note: "Please don't insult my intelligence. NW." The rejection stung, but Henry understood it. Flowers weren't going to fix what he had broken. Grand gestures weren't going to erase the months of pain he had caused. But he didn't know how else to begin, how else to show her that he was sincere in his desire to make amends. The next week, Henry discovered that the medical bills from Nikia's hospital stay had gone to collections. Her insurance had lapsed when she lost her job, and the emergency room visit had created a debt she couldn't possibly pay on her catering salary. Henry paid the bills immediately, then arranged to cover all of her prenatal care and delivery expenses. But when Dr. Evangeline Rothwell mentioned the anonymous benefactor during Nikia's next appointment, Nikia's reaction was swift and furious. She arrived at Henry's office that afternoon, still wearing her catering uniform from a lunch event, her pregnant belly prominent beneath the black polo shirt. Henry's assistant, Lorelei Sinclair, tried to stop her, But Nikia brushed past her and marched into Henry's corner office. "You cannot buy your way back into my life," she said without preamble, throwing a certified check onto his mahogany desk. "Here's your money back, every penny." Henry looked at the check, her entire savings account based on the amount, and felt his heart break a little more. "Nikia, you need that money. The baby needs proper medical care." "My baby will get proper medical care through the state program I qualified for," she replied icily. "What she doesn't need is a father who thinks he can purchase forgiveness like a commodity." "I'm not trying to buy forgiveness," Henry said, standing from behind his desk. "I'm trying to take responsibility for the situation I put you in. If I hadn't destroyed your career, you wouldn't need financial help. And if you had trusted me, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all." Nikia's eyes blazed with anger and hurt. "You made a choice, Henry. You chose to believe lies over the woman you claim to love. You don't get to assuage your guilt by throwing money at the consequences." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Stop trying to fix this with gestures, Henry. What's broken between us can't be solved with flowers and checks." Desperate to find some way to connect with her, Henry began frequenting the coffee shop where Nikia worked her morning shift. Gabriel's Cafe was a small, intimate place in Soho, the kind of neighborhood spot that survived on regulars and good coffee rather than corporate backing. Henry would order a simple black coffee and sit at a corner table working on his laptop while stealing glances at Nikia as she moved between customers. She was graceful even while pregnant, her movements economical and efficient. She smiled at the regular customers, remembering their orders and asking about their families, creating the kind of warm community atmosphere that made the cafe feel like home. But she never acknowledged Henry's presence. She would take his order with professional politeness, make his coffee with perfect efficiency, and hand it to him without meeting his eyes. It was like he was invisible to her, just another anonymous customer in her daily routine. "You know she knows you're here," said Isabella Rodriguez, the cafe owner, sliding into the seat across from Henry one morning. "She's not oblivious to your presence." Henry looked up from his laptop, surprised by the directness. "I'm just having coffee." Every morning for 2 weeks, same table, same order, same hopeful looks in her direction. Isabella smiled knowingly. "You're Nikia's ex-husband, the one who broke her heart." Henry winced at the blunt assessment. "Is it that obvious? To someone who's watched her try to put herself back together for the past 6 months? Yes. Isabella studied him with the shrewd eyes of someone who had seen plenty of human drama in her small cafe. "She's a good woman, you know. One of the best people I've ever employed. Whatever happened between you two, she didn't deserve to end up scraping by on minimum wage while pregnant." "I know," Henry said quietly. "I'm trying to make it right." "Are you? Or are you trying to make yourself feel better about making it wrong in the first place?" The question haunted Henry for days. Was his pursuit of Nikia really about her needs, or was it about his own guilt and regret? Was he trying to rebuild their relationship for her sake and their daughters, or because he couldn't live with the knowledge of what he had destroyed? He got his answer on a rainy Thursday evening when he saw Nikia slip on the wet sidewalk outside her apartment building. She was carrying groceries and struggling with an umbrella, her pregnant belly making her balance precarious. When her feet went out from under her, Henry's heart stopped. He was out of his car and running before he even realized he had been following her home from work, a habit he was developing that bordered on stalking. By the time he reached her, Nikia was sitting on the sidewalk, groceries scattered around her, rain soaking through her jacket. "Are you hurt?" Henry dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. Is the baby okay?" "I'm fine," Nikia said, but her voice was shaky. "Just embarrassed." "Let me help you," Henry said, reaching for the scattered groceries. "Don't." The word was sharp, final. Nikia struggled to her feet without accepting his offered hand, her dignity intact despite the rain and the fall. "Don't help me, Henry. Don't follow me. Don't lurk outside my workplace or my apartment building." I wasn't lurking. "What would you call it?" Nikia's eyes flashed with anger. "You think I don't see you there? You think I don't notice your car parked across from the cafe every morning or outside the cleaning company in the afternoons?" Henry felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." "I've been taking care of myself for 6 months, Nikia replied, gathering her scattered groceries. "I managed to survive losing my marriage, my business, and my reputation. Without your protection, I think I can handle a flight of stairs and a sidewalk." That weekend, Henry's encounter with an elderly man in a wheelchair outside the Natural History Museum changed his perspective entirely. The gentleman had dropped his wallet, and Henry had retrieved it, then offered to push his wheelchair up the steep museum ramp. "Very kind of you, son," said Thomas Beaumont, whose rich voice carried the warmth of genuine gratitude. "Not many people take time for strangers these days." "It's my pleasure," Henry replied, surprised by how natural the kindness felt when it wasn't motivated by guilt or expectation. As they sat on a bench outside the museum, Thomas feeding pigeons while they talked, Henry found himself sharing his story with an honesty that surprised him. There was something about the older man's gentle wisdom that invited confession. Only when Thomas mentioned his brilliant architect niece, who had also experienced betrayal, did Henry realize the cosmic irony of seeking advice from Nikia's beloved uncle. "You're Thomas Beaumont," Henry said slowly, recognition dawning. "Nikia's Uncle Thomas," the older man smiled sadly. "I wondered if you'd figure it out. She's mentioned you, you know, even after everything, even through all the pain. She's never stopped loving you." Henry left his conversation with Thomas feeling like he had been given a map for territory he didn't know how to navigate. That evening, he sat in his empty penthouse. Dawn had moved out immediately after the wedding night confession, taking only her personal belongings, and really looked at his life for the first time in months. He had been so focused on trying to win Nikia back that he hadn't examined his own role in their destruction. Yes, Dawn had lied and manipulated, but she had only been successful because Henry was susceptible to her manipulation. She had played on his insecurities, his fears, his inability to trust completely in love. Henry thought about the man he had been during his marriage to Nikia, successful, confident, but also guarded. He had loved her desperately, but underneath that love had been a constant fear of losing her. That fear had made him vulnerable to Dawn's lies because deep down, he had never quite believed he deserved someone as extraordinary as Nikia. His phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. "How are you holding up? Any progress with Nikia?" Henry stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I've been asking the wrong question. It's not about progress with her. It's about progress with myself." "What do you mean?" "I mean I need to figure out why I was so quick to believe the worst of someone I claimed to love unconditionally. I need to understand what made me capable of destroying something precious because I was afraid of losing it." Sterling's response was immediate. "That sounds like therapy talk." Henry laughed, surprising himself. Maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what I need. The next morning, instead of going to Gabriel's cafe to stare hopefully at Nikia while she ignored him, Henry called Dr. Miranda Ashworth, a therapist who specialized in relationships and trust issues. If he was going to have any chance of being worthy of Nikia's forgiveness, he needed to understand and change the parts of himself that had made their destruction possible. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It wasn't about flowers or money or hovering protectively. It was about becoming a man who could be trusted with precious things. A man who could love without fear, who could fight for relationships instead of running from them when they became complicated. As Henry sat in the waiting room for his first therapy appointment, he realized that this was the first thing he had done since Dawn's confession that wasn't really about Nikia at all. This was about him, about fixing the broken places inside himself that had made him vulnerable to lies and suspicion. It was the beginning of a different kind of pursuit, not chasing after someone he had lost, but chasing after the man he needed to become. The man who might someday be worthy of a second chance. Meanwhile, Nikia had heard about Henry's kindness to Thomas Beaumont, her beloved uncle, through one of Thomas's phone calls. She sat in her small apartment that evening, one hand on her belly, trying to reconcile the man who had shown such thoughtless kindness to a stranger with the man who had refused to trust her when she needed it most. Maybe, she thought, people were capable of change. Maybe it was possible to learn from devastating mistakes. Maybe love could be rebuilt on more solid foundations than the first time around. But those were dangerous thoughts for a woman who had learned to live without hope, and Nikia pushed them away before they could take root in her carefully guarded heart. Chapter 7. Growing Life, Growing Distance. As autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Nikia's pregnancy progressed into her 8th month. Her belly had grown round and prominent, making even simple tasks challenging, but she had never felt more determined to prove her independence. Every morning, she stood in front of her small bathroom mirror, watching her body change and marveling at the life growing inside her. "Good morning, little one," she would whisper to her reflection, her hands tracing the curve of her stomach. "Another day, just you and me." The baby had become more active recently, responding to sounds and movement, with kicks and stretches that sometimes took Nikia's breath away. She had started talking to her daughter regularly, describing the world outside the womb, sharing her hopes and fears for their future together. "Your daddy is out there somewhere," she would say during the quiet moments before sleep. "He's trying to find his way back to us, but I don't know if I should let him. What do you think, sweetheart? Do people really change?" Henry had, indeed, been trying to change, though Nikia was unaware of the extent of his efforts. For the past month, he had been seeing Dr. Miranda Ashworth twice a week, diving deep into the psychological patterns that had made him susceptible to Dawn's manipulation. "Tell me about your parents' marriage," Dr. Ashworth said during one particularly difficult session. Henry shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me." Henry thought about his childhood, about the elegant but cold home where love was expressed through achievement rather than affection. "My father worked constantly. My mother managed the social calendar and charity functions. They were cordial to each other, respectful, but I never saw them really connect emotionally." "And how did that affect your understanding of love?" "I suppose I learned that love was something you could lose if you weren't careful, that it was conditional, based on performance rather than unconditional acceptance." Henry paused, the insight hitting him like a physical blow. "I never really believed Nikia could love me just for who I was. I was always waiting for her to realize she could do better. So when Dawn presented you with evidence of betrayal, it confirmed what I was already afraid of," Henry finished quietly. "That I wasn't enough to keep her." Dr. Ashworth nodded. "Fear-based decisions rarely lead to the outcomes we want. When you confronted Nikia with those photographs, were you seeking truth or confirmation of your fears?" The question haunted Henry for days. He realized that he had never really wanted to hear Nikia's explanation of the photographs because he had been terrified that her explanation would require him to trust completely, something he had never learned to do. Meanwhile, Nikia's world had stabilized into a routine that didn't include Henry's presence. She had stopped expecting him to appear at the cafe or outside her apartment building. She had assumed his attempts at reconciliation were motivated by guilt rather than genuine love. and his absence seemed to confirm her suspicions. She worked her morning shift at Gabriel's cafe, spent afternoons cleaning office buildings, and took evening catering gigs when her energy allowed. The work was exhausting, but it provided a sense of purpose and independence that she desperately needed. "You're glowing today," observed Isabella Rodriguez, as Nikia prepared the morning's first pot of coffee. "That pregnancy glow is no joke." Nikia smiled, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "She's been very active lately. I think she's getting excited to meet the world." "Any word from the father?" Isabella asked carefully. She had grown protective of Nikia over the months, witnessing a struggle to rebuild her life. "No," Nikia replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. "And that's probably for the best. We're better off without the complications." But even as she said the words, Nikia felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal and the divorce and the months of silence, she still missed Henry. She missed the way he used to rest his hand on her stomach when they lay in bed together, dreaming about their future child. She missed his voice, reading aloud from pregnancy books, his excitement about every milestone and development. What Nikia didn't know was that Henry had been attending prenatal classes at the same hospital where she received her care. He sat in the back row of the childbirth preparation course, learning about labor and delivery, taking notes about breathing techniques and comfort measures, preparing for a birth he might not be invited to witness. First-time father, Celestine Parker, the nurse who taught the class during a break one evening. "Yes," Henry replied, then corrected himself. "Maybe it's complicated." Celestine had seen plenty of complicated family situations in her 20 years of obstetric nursing. The important thing is that you're preparing to be supportive, however that looks in your specific situation. Henry nodded, looking around at the other couples practicing breathing exercises and massage techniques. They all seemed so united in their anticipation, so secure in their partnerships. He envied their certainty, their shared excitement, their ability to approach parenthood as a team. "What if the mother doesn't want me there?" Henry asked quietly. "Then you respect her wishes and find other ways to be involved," Celestine replied. "Birth is an incredibly vulnerable experience for women. The most important thing is that she feels safe and supported, even if that support doesn't come from you directly." One evening in late October, Nikia was walking home from her afternoon cleaning job when the first sharp pain seized her lower back. She paused against a building wall, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as she waited for the sensation to pass. "Braxton Hicks contractions," she told herself firmly. Dr. Rothwell had warned her about practice contractions in the final weeks. But as she continued walking, the pains became rhythmic, insistent, impossible to dismiss. By the time she climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, Nikia was struggling to catch her breath. Each contraction felt like a vice tightening around her middle, and fear began to creep into her chest. At 34 weeks, the baby wasn't ready. This couldn't be happening. Not alone. Not like this. Inside her small studio, she tried to distract herself with television, but the contractions were coming every few minutes now, lasting longer and growing stronger. When she called Dr. Rothwell's after-hours line, the advice nurse told her to come to the hospital immediately. "This could be early labor," the nurse explained. "At 34 weeks, we want to monitor both you and the baby closely." Nikia hung up the phone and looked around her empty apartment. She had prepared for this moment for months, but she had always imagined she would have more time, more warning. Her hospital bag was packed and ready, but she had no one to call, no one to drive her to the hospital. She thought briefly of calling Henry. He was still technically the father, still had a right to know if their daughter was being born early. But the thought of reaching out to him in her moment of vulnerability was more frightening than facing labor alone. Instead, Nikia called a taxi and made her way to Mercy General Hospital on her own. The emergency room was busy, but they triaged her quickly when they saw her condition. Within minutes, she was in a labor and delivery room, connected to monitors that tracked her contractions and the baby's heartbeat. "Your little one is showing some signs of distress," explained Dr. Rothwell, studying the monitor strips. "We're going to give you medication to try to stop the contractions and keep you here for observation." Nikia nodded, trying to stay calm despite the fear that was rising in her chest. 34 weeks was early, not dangerously early, but early enough to cause complications. The baby's lungs might not be fully developed. There could be feeding difficulties, temperature regulation problems, a host of issues that could affect her daughter's health. "Is there someone we should call?" asked Maya Chen, the labor and delivery nurse. "The father, a family member?" "No," Nikia said quickly. "There's no one." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of her isolation. She was facing one of the most significant moments of her life, completely alone, with no one to hold her hand or reassure her that everything would be okay. Unknown to Nikia, Henry was in the hospital that same evening, attending a tour of the maternity ward as part of his childbirth preparation class. As the group walked through the hallways, learning about hospital procedures and visiting policies, Henry felt a mix of excitement and dread. This was where his daughter would be born. These were the rooms where he hoped to meet her for the first time, to hold her and welcome her into the world. But he had no guarantee that he would be welcome when that moment came. "The most important thing to remember," Celestine was telling the group, "is that birth is unpredictable. Labor can start suddenly, proceed quickly or slowly, and require changes to your birth plan. The key is to stay flexible and focused on the health of mother and baby." Henry found himself thinking about Nikia, wondering if she had a birth plan, if she had someone to advocate for her needs during labor, if she was scared about facing childbirth alone. The thought of her going through that experience without support made his chest tight with regret and worry. As the tour group passed the triage area, Henry caught a glimpse of a familiar figure being wheeled into a labor room. His heart stopped as he recognized Nikia's profile, her distinctive braids, her pregnant belly covered by a hospital gown. "Excuse me," he said to Celestine, breaking away from the group. There's an emergency." He followed the direction of Nikia's wheelchair, but by the time he reached the labor and delivery ward, the doors had closed and he was stopped by security protocols. Visitors needed permission from patients to enter the ward, and Henry had no way of knowing if Nikia would want to see him. He spent the next several hours in the hospital waiting room, pacing and checking with the information desk every few minutes. The staff couldn't give him details about Nikia's condition due to privacy regulations, but they confirmed that she was a patient in the maternity ward. Henry called Sterling, needing someone to talk to, someone to help him figure out what he should do. "She's in labor?" Sterling asked, his voice sharp with concern. "I think so. Or maybe preterm labor that they're trying to stop. I don't know." Henry ran his hands through his hair. "I saw her being admitted, but I can't get any information because I'm not listed as her emergency contact. Do you want me to come down there?" "No. Yes. I don't know what I want." Henry sank into a waiting room chair. "What if something goes wrong, Sterling? What if I lose them both before I have a chance to make things right?" "Then you'll live with that regret for the rest of your life," Sterling said bluntly. "But right now, they're both alive, and you have a chance to be there for them. The question is whether you're going to respect Nikia's need for space or insert yourself into a situation where you might not be wanted." Henry considered this, thinking about Dr. Ashworth's teachings about selfless love versus selfish need. Was his desire to be present about supporting Nikia, or was it about his own need to feel involved and important? "I'm going to stay," he decided. "Not to force my way into her room, but to be here in case she needs something, in case there's an emergency and someone needs to make decisions about our daughter." That sounds like the right choice, Sterling said. And Henry, whatever happens tonight, you're already being a better father than you were 6 months ago. As the night wore on, Henry maintained his vigil in the waiting room, checking periodically with the nurses' station for any updates they were allowed to share. Around midnight, he learned that Nikia's contractions had stopped, and she was resting, uncomfortably, but they were keeping her for observation through the next day. Relief flooded through him. His daughter would stay safe inside her mother's womb for a while longer, giving her more time to develop and grow strong. Nikia was stable and out of immediate danger. Henry settled into the uncomfortable waiting room chair, prepared to spend the night at the hospital. He wouldn't intrude on Nikia's recovery, but he would be there, ready to help if she needed anything, ready to support them both in whatever way was appropriate. For the first time in months, Henry felt like he was exactly where he belonged, not pursuing or pressuring, not trying to force his way back into Nikia's life, but simply being present and available. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. As dawn broke over the city, casting gentle light through the waiting room windows, Henry dozed fitfully in his chair, dreaming of holding his daughter for the first time, of seeing Nikia smile, without the shadow of hurt in her eyes, of the family they might still have a chance to become. 3 floors above him, Nikia lay in her hospital bed, one hand on her quiet belly, wondering if the sharp pain in her chest was just anxiety, or if it was the recognition that even in her most vulnerable moment, some part of her still wished Henry were there to hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Henry hired Marcus Blackwell to uncover irrefutable proof of Dawn's deception. After 3 weeks of investigation, Marcus had compiled a devastating file of evidence that would finally give Henry the ammunition he needed. This was one of the most systematic character assassinations I've ever investigated, Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. Ms. Schmitz documented her own crimes with remarkable thoroughness. The evidence was damning. Receipts for fake pregnancy tests, browser histories from Dawn's work computer, which Marcus had legally accessed through a corporate security audit, bank records of payments to Marcus himself from 2 years earlier, when Dawn had hired him to follow Nikia, and most devastatingly, witness statements from Dawn's sister Rebecca, who had finally agreed to cooperate after being shown the other evidence. Rebecca provided these text message screenshots voluntarily, Marcus explained. She's been carrying guilt about her sister's lies for months. Once she saw the scope of the deception, she decided to come forward. One message, sent the day after, Henry filed for divorce, read, "It worked perfectly. He believed every photo. N is completely destroyed, and H is finally free. Now I just need to position myself as his savior and comfort." Henry felt sick reading through the evidence, realizing the full scope of Dawn's betrayal. She hadn't just lied about Nikia's faithfulness. She had orchestrated an elaborate psychological campaign designed to destroy their marriage from the inside out. "There's more," Marcus said, producing a second file. "I found the original photographs she doctored. Your wife was meeting with her cousin James to plan a surprise renovation of your childhood home. She was trying to surprise you for your wedding anniversary." Henry stared at the undoctored photographs, seeing them clearly for the first time. Without Dawn's careful cropping and strategic angles, it was obvious that the interaction between Nikia and James was familial, innocent. The kiss on the cheek that had seemed so damning in the edited version was clearly a casual goodbye between cousins. "She was planning to surprise me," Henry whispered, the words hitting him like physical blows. "She was planning something beautiful for our anniversary, and I destroyed her for it." "Mr. Asa," Marcus said gently, "what do you want to do with this information?" Henry thought about Nikia, alone in her small apartment, 8 months pregnant, with their child still believing that he had rejected her because he thought she was unfaithful. She deserved to know the truth, not just Dawn's confession, which could be dismissed as guilt-motivated dramatics, but the cold, hard evidence of the systematic campaign against their marriage. "I need to show this to Nikia," Henry said. But not alone. She needs to hear Dawn admit to everything while seeing the proof. She needs to understand that what happened to us wasn't her fault. Henry's lawyer, Sterling Pemberton, arranged for a formal confrontation at his office with a video connection to Nikia's apartment so she could witness everything without having to travel in her condition. The evidence was laid out on Sterling's conference table like pieces of a puzzle that finally revealed the complete picture. Dawn arrived looking hollow and defeated, her usual polished appearance replaced by the disheveled look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. The past month had been difficult for her. Henry had moved forward with annulling their marriage, citing fraud and deception, and the social scandal had destroyed her reputation in their circle. "Thank you for coming," Sterling said formally. "As you know, Mr. Asa has retained an investigator to look into certain discrepancies in the evidence that led to his divorce from Nikia Williams. We'd like to discuss those findings with you." On the laptop screen, Nikia appeared from her apartment, looking exhausted but alert. Her pregnancy was now in its final weeks, and Henry could see the strain of carrying their child while maintaining her work schedule. "Hello, Nikia," Dawn said quietly, unable to meet her eyes even through the video connection. "Dawn," Nikia's voice was steady, controlled. "I'm here because Henry says you have something to tell me. Something beyond what you confessed at the hospital." Sterling methodically presented the evidence Marcus had gathered, reading aloud from Dawn's text messages to her sister, showing the receipts for fake pregnancy tests, displaying the original photographs alongside Dawn's doctored versions. With each piece of evidence, Dawn seemed to shrink further into herself. The elaborate nature of her deception was laid bare, revealed as the calculated campaign of destruction it had truly been. "The pregnancy test you were going to show Henry on your honeymoon," Sterling said, holding up a receipt. "Purchased from a novelty website that specializes in fake pregnancy pranks. You planned to fake a miscarriage after the wedding to bond you both in shared grief." Dawn nodded miserably. "Yes. The photographs that convinced Henry that Nikia was having an affair. You hired Marcus Blackwell to follow her, and when he found no evidence of wrongdoing, you doctored innocent family photos to create the appearance of infidelity. Yes. The email correspondence that suggested Nikia was planning to leave Henry for another man. You created fake email accounts and forged the entire conversation." Yes. On the laptop screen, Nikia was crying. Not the dramatic tears of devastation, but the quiet tears of someone finally receiving validation for their pain. "Why?" Nikia's voice came through the laptop speakers barely above a whisper. "We were best friends, Dawn. I trusted you with everything. I came to you for advice about my marriage problems. I included you in every important moment of my life. Why did you want to destroy that?" Dawn finally looked at the camera, her face ravaged with guilt and self-loathing. "Because I loved him first. Because I met him before you did and thought we had a connection. Because when he met you at that charity fundraiser, it was like I became invisible. So you decided to make me invisible instead. I thought if I could just get you out of the picture, if I could show Henry that you weren't worthy of his love, he would finally see what was right in front of him." Dawn's voice broke. "I thought I could make him love me the way he loved you." "But that's not how love works," Nikia said, her hand resting on her belly. "You can't manipulate someone into loving you. You can't destroy their trust and expect them to turn to you for comfort." "I know that now," Dawn whispered. "I've known it since your wedding night, since I saw the way Henry looked at you lying in that hospital bed. He never looked at me that way. Not once in all the months we were together." Henry had been silent. Throughout the confrontation, letting Sterling present the evidence and allowing Nikia to ask her questions. But now he leaned forward, speaking directly to Dawn. "You didn't just destroy my marriage," he said quietly. "You destroyed Nikia's career, her reputation, her sense of self-worth. You left her struggling to survive while pregnant with my child. You made me complicit in emotional and financial abuse of the woman I loved most in the world." "I know," Dawn said. "I know I destroyed everything good and beautiful because I was jealous and selfish and couldn't stand not being chosen. But the worst part," Henry continued, "is that you almost succeeded. You almost convinced me that love was something to be feared, that trust was weakness, that the woman who loved me unconditionally was my enemy." Dawn nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "I want you to look at Nikia," Henry said firmly. "I want you to see what your lies cost her." Dawn raised her eyes to the laptop screen, taking in Nikia's exhausted appearance, her swollen belly, the small apartment visible behind her that was such a stark contrast to the life she had once lived. "I'm sorry," Dawn said, the words seeming inadequate for the magnitude of her deception. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry for what I did to both of you. The evidence we've gathered today will be turned over to our legal team," Sterling announced. "While most of Dawn's actions fall into civil rather than criminal territory, there are grounds for lawsuits regarding defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with business relationships. The financial damages alone could be substantial." "I understand," Dawn said quietly. "I'll cooperate fully with any legal proceedings." "There's something else," Henry said, producing one final document. "I've had my legal team prepare a comprehensive settlement for Nikia, full restitution for the assets she lost in the divorce, plus compensation for lost earnings, damaged reputation, and the emotional distress you caused." On the screen, Nikia's eyes widened. "Henry, I don't want your money." "It's not charity," Henry said firmly. "It's justice. You lost everything because of lies I chose to believe. The least I can do is restore what was taken from you." Nikia was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, she nodded. "For the baby, I'll accept it for our daughter." "Our daughter," Henry repeated, the words filled with wonder and hope. After Dawn left, escorted by Sterling to begin the process of legal proceedings against her, Henry sat alone in the conference room with his laptop, looking at Nikia through the video connection. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Validated," Nikia said after a moment. "For 6 months, I've been carrying the weight of your accusations, wondering if maybe I had done something wrong, if maybe the problems in our marriage were my fault after all. They weren't. None of it was your fault. I know that now." Nikia shifted uncomfortably, her hand moving to her lower back. "But knowing the truth doesn't undo the damage, Henry. It doesn't erase the fact that when I needed you to trust me, you chose to believe lies instead." Henry nodded, accepting the painful truth of her words. "I failed you in the most fundamental way a husband can fail his wife. I let fear override love, and I let suspicion destroy trust." "So where does that leave us?" Nikia asked. "We know the truth now. We know Dawn orchestrated everything, but that doesn't automatically fix what's broken between us." Henry thought about the months of therapy, the hard work he'd done to understand his own psychological patterns, the changes he'd made in how he approached relationships and trust. "It leaves us with a choice," he said finally. "We can remain broken, defined by the worst thing that ever happened to us, or we can choose to see if love is strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. And if it's not, if the trust is too damaged to repair, then we find a way to co-parent our daughter with respect and kindness, and we both move forward, knowing that we tried to rebuild something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed." Nikia was quiet for a long time, her eyes studying Henry's. Based through the video connection. You look different, she said finally. Different how? Older, sadder, but also more real somehow. Like you've been through something that changed you fundamentally. I have been through something that changed me, Henry replied. I lost the most important thing in my life because I was too afraid to trust completely. That kind of loss either destroys you or forces you to become someone capable of never making that mistake again. And which one happened to you? Henry looked directly into the camera, hoping she could see the sincerity in his eyes. I'm still finding out, but I'd like to find out with you if you'll let me. On the screen, Nikia touched her belly as the baby kicked visibly beneath her shirt. She's been very active today. I think all this emotion is affecting her. What are you going to name her? Henry asked softly. Hope, Nikia said without hesitation. Because even in the darkest moments, I never stopped hoping that someday the truth would come out, that someday justice would be served, that someday... She paused, her voice catching. That someday love would find a way to heal what seemed irreparably broken. Henry felt tears in his eyes. Hope is perfect. She's going to be perfect. The video call ended with tentative plans for Henry to attend Nikia's next prenatal appointment if she felt comfortable with his presence. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first real conversation they'd had in 8 months, the first time they'd spoken as two people working toward a common goal, rather than two adversaries guarding their wounded hearts. As Henry left Sterling's office that evening, walking out into the crisp November air, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope. The truth was finally revealed. Justice was being served. And while their love story was far from over, it no longer felt like a tragedy. It felt like a beginning. Chapter 9. A quiet beginning. 3 days after the confrontation with Dawn, Henry stood outside Nikia's apartment building holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite flowers, though he doubted she remembered telling him that during their early courtship. The financial settlement had been processed and Nikia's accounts had been restored, but money couldn't repair the emotional distance that still stretched between them like a chasm. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, each step feeling monumental. When he reached her door, he stood there for several minutes, gathering courage for a conversation that could either begin to heal their broken relationship or confirm that some damage was irreparable. The knock was soft, tentative. When Nikia opened the door, she looked surprised to see him standing there, flowers in hand, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. At 36 weeks pregnant, she looked tired but beautiful, her skin glowing with the vitality of approaching motherhood. "I brought these for you," Henry said, offering the sunflowers. "I remembered that you used to keep them on your desk at the firm. You said they reminded you that there was always something bright to look forward to." Nikia accepted the flowers, touched by the memory he had preserved. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything about you," Henry said quietly. "Every conversation we ever had, every dream you shared with me, every moment of happiness we built together. Losing you didn't erase those memories. It made them more precious." Nikia invited him into her small studio apartment, apologizing for the cramped space and modest furnishings. The contrast to their former penthouse was stark, but Henry noticed how she had made the space warm and welcoming with photographs, plants, and the architectural drawings she still worked on during her free time. "You're still designing," he observed, looking at the blueprints spread across her small kitchen table. "Just for myself," Nikia said, settling carefully into her single armchair. "Dreaming about sustainable housing projects I'll probably never get to build, but it keeps the passion alive." Henry studied her designs, recognizing the brilliant innovation that had first attracted him to her work. "These are extraordinary. The community integration, the environmental impact. This is exactly the kind of housing the city needs. It's just fantasy now, Nikia said with a rueful smile. My reputation in the industry is destroyed. No one wants to work with the architect who was accused of adultery and lost her business in a messy divorce. That's going to change, Henry said firmly. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what happened to you. Your reputation will be restored. You can't fix this with press releases and public statements, Nikia replied. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. In business and in personal relationships, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Henry found the courage to voice what he had come to say. I was wrong about everything, Nikia. Not just about believing Dawn's lies, but about the fundamentals of love and trust. I was wrong to refuse your explanations, wrong to choose fear over faith, wrong to abandon the most precious thing in my life because I was too terrified to fight for it. Nikia studied his face, searching for the sincerity she desperately wanted to believe. What changed? What made you finally understand? Months of therapy, Henry admitted without shame. Brutal self-examination to understand why I was so quick to believe the worst of someone I claimed to love unconditionally. I learned that my terror of losing you made me vulnerable to manipulation, that my own insecurities handed Dawn the weapons she used to destroy us. And you think therapy fixed those insecurities? Henry shook his head firmly. Therapy helped me understand them. The real fixing, that's daily work I'll be doing for the rest of my life. Every morning, I have to choose trust over suspicion, love over self-protection, courage over cowardice. It's work I should have been doing all along. Nikia felt the baby kick strongly, a reminder of the life they had created together during their last week as a married couple. She placed her hand over the movement, and Henry's eyes were drawn to the gesture. Can I? He began hesitantly, then stopped. Can you what? Can I feel her kick? I know I don't have the right to ask, but I've missed so much already. Nikia hesitated, then nodded. Henry moved to kneel beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her belly. Almost immediately, their daughter responded with a strong kick that made both parents smile. She's active today, Nikia said softly. She knows her daddy is here, Henry replied, wonder in his voice. Dr. Rothwell says babies can recognize voices from inside the womb. You've been talking to Dr. Rothwell? Henry looked slightly embarrassed. I've been going to prenatal classes, learning about childbirth and infant care. I wanted to be prepared, even if... He trailed off, not wanting to voice his fear that he might not be welcome at their daughter's birth. Henry, Nikia said carefully, what do you want from me? What are you hoping to achieve with these visits? Henry considered the question seriously. I want to earn the right to be part of our daughter's life. I want to prove that I've learned from my mistakes and become someone worthy of your trust again. But most of all, I want to rebuild what we had, not just restore it, but make it stronger than before. That's a lot to want from someone you divorced. Based on lies, I know. And I know I may never get it, but Nikia, I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought you had betrayed me. That love was twisted by fear and suspicion, but it never died. Nikia felt tears well up in her eyes. Love isn't enough, Henry. We loved each other 3 years ago, and it didn't stop you from choosing to believe the worst of me when someone planted doubt in your mind. You're right, Henry acknowledged. Love without trust is just emotional torture, but I'm not the same man who walked away from you 8 months ago. I've learned things about myself, about relationships, about what it means to really commit to someone. The baby kicked again, harder this time, making Nikia wince slightly. Henry noticed immediately. Are you okay? Should I call the doctor? I'm fine, Nikia assured him. She's just very active today. The doctor says that's normal at this stage. Henry kept his hand on her belly, feeling their daughter's movements beneath his palm. I've been reading books about pregnancy and childbirth. I know I don't have the right to be there when she's born, but I want you to know that I'll respect whatever decisions you make about that. What do you want? Nikia asked. If you could choose, what would you want? I'd want to be there when she takes her first breath. I'd want to cut her umbilical cord and be the first person to hold her after you. I'd want to whisper to her that her daddy loves her and will spend the rest of his life making up for the months he was absent. Nikia's resolve wavered as she heard the raw emotion in his voice. And what about us? What would you want for us? Henry looked directly into her eyes. I'd want the chance to court you again, to earn your love the way I should have earned it the first time, with patience and respect and absolute faithfulness to your heart. I'd want to marry you again, but this time as someone who understands that love requires trust, and trust requires courage. A comfortable silence settled between them as they both processed the weight of Henry's words. The baby continued to move under his hand, creating an intimate connection that transcended their complicated history. I need time, Nikia said finally. I need to see if the changes you're talking about are real and lasting. I need to know that you won't run away again the first time someone tries to come between us. I understand, Henry replied, and I'll wait as long as it takes. Our daughter deserves parents who trust each other completely, and if that means I have to spend months or years proving myself, then that's what I'll do. It might take years, Nikia warned. The kind of trust you broke doesn't heal quickly. Then, we have years to work on it, Henry said simply. I'm not going anywhere, Nikia, not ever again. As if in response to her father's promise, the baby kicked particularly hard, making both parents laugh. I think she approves, Nikia said, smiling for the first time since Henry had arrived. She has good judgment, Henry replied. She gets that from her mother. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp pain that made Nikia gasp and double over. Henry was immediately alert, his hand moving from her belly to support her back. What's wrong? Is it the baby? I think... Nikia breathed through another wave of pain. I think these might be real contractions. They've been happening on and off all day, but they're getting stronger. Henry checked his watch, timing the contractions as they came. They're about 4 minutes apart. We need to get you to the hospital. It's probably false labor again, Nikia said, trying to downplay her discomfort. Dr. Rothwell said that's common in the final weeks. But even as she spoke, another contraction gripped her, stronger than the last, and she couldn't hide her discomfort. We're going to the hospital, Henry said firmly, already moving to gather the overnight bag she had packed weeks ago. I'll drive you. Henry, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted gently. This is exactly where I need to be. This is exactly what I should have been doing all along, taking care of you and our baby. As Henry helped Nikia down the 3 flights of stairs, pausing with each contraction, she realized that his presence felt natural rather than intrusive. For the first time in 8 months, she wasn't facing a medical crisis alone. Are you sure about this? She asked as he helped her into his car. Being there for the birth if this is real labor? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Henry replied, starting the engine. If you'll let me, I want to be there when our daughter enters the world. I want to be part of the first moment of her life, instead of missing the first months like I did with the pregnancy. As they drove through the city toward Mercy General Hospital, Nikia felt something shifting inside her. Not just the baby preparing for birth, but her own heart beginning to open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, love really could heal even the deepest wounds. It wouldn't be easy. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, with patience and consistency and absolute honesty. But as Henry held her hand through another contraction, as he whispered reassurances and promises for their future, Nikia allowed herself to hope that their story wasn't ending with betrayal and divorce. Maybe it was just beginning with forgiveness and the chance to love each other better than they had before. The baby kicked one more time, as if agreeing with her mother's tentative optimism, and Nikia squeezed Henry's hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, ready to meet their daughter and begin the next chapter of their complicated, beautiful, hopeful love story. Chapter 10. Love finds its way back. The labor and delivery room at Mercy General Hospital felt both familiar and surreal to Henry as he held Nikia's hand through another contraction. 8 months ago, he had been in this same hospital after her collapse at his wedding reception. Now he was here as the father of their child, finally where he belonged. "You're doing amazing," Henry whispered, smoothing Nikia's braids back from her sweat-dampened forehead. "You're the strongest person I know." The labor progressed quickly. Their daughter was eager to meet the world. At 36 weeks, Dr. Evangeline Rothwell was confident the baby's lungs were ready. "I can see the baby's head," Dr. Rothwell announced. "A few more pushes and you'll be holding your daughter." Henry felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the miracle unfold. Nothing had prepared him for this overwhelming emotion. "One more big push, Nikia," the doctor encouraged. With a rush of fluid and a lusty cry that filled the room, Hope Asa entered the world. "She's here," Dr. Rothwell announced, lifting the baby. "She's beautiful and breathing perfectly. Would you like to cut the umbilical cord?" Dr. Rothwell asked Henry. Henry looked at Nikia, seeking permission. When she nodded through her exhausted tears, he accepted the scissors with trembling hands. As he made the cut, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This tiny person was his daughter, and he would spend the rest of his life protecting her, loving her, proving he was worthy of her. After Hope was cleaned and examined, 5 pounds, 3 ounces of pure perfection, Henry held his daughter for the first time. She was so small, so perfect, that he was afraid to breathe too suddenly. "She's absolutely perfect," he whispered, unable to look away from Hope's tiny features. Nikia watched as Henry naturally adjusted his hold when Hope began to fuss, instinctively supporting her head and speaking in soothing tones. "You're a natural at this." "I have months of lost time to make up for," Henry replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be present for everything from now on." When they brought Hope home to the penthouse 3 days later, Henry had prepared a nursery, painted in soft yellows and greens, with a crib positioned to catch morning light. "When did you do all this?" Nikia asked, running her hand along the crib rail. "Over the past month. I kept hoping I'd have the chance to use it." Henry placed Hope's car seat gently on the changing table. "I missed most of your pregnancy, but I wanted to be ready for her arrival." The first weeks of living together were an adjustment. Henry threw himself into fatherhood with intensity, learning diaper changes, mastering 3 a.m. bottles, walking floors, with a colicky baby. Nikia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble as she watched this transformed man with their daughter. 1 month after Hope's birth, Nikia found Henry in the nursery at midnight, holding their sleeping daughter in the rocking chair. "She was fussy," he explained quietly. "I didn't want her crying to wake you." "What do you tell her during these talks?" Nikia whispered. "That her daddy made terrible mistakes, but he's going to spend the rest of his life making it up to both of you. That love is worth fighting for, and forgiveness is possible if someone is truly sorry and willing to change." Tears pricked Nikia's eyes. As the weeks passed, they began having real conversations again about Hope's future, about Nikia's return to architecture, about Henry's foundation for sustainable housing. 3 months after Hope's birth, on a quiet Sunday morning with snow falling outside, Henry found Nikia sketching at the kitchen island, not architectural plans, but pictures of their daughter. "I've been thinking about the sustainable community development," Nikia said. "I've decided to accept the partnership." Henry's heart raced. Partnership? In business? Definitely. In parenting? Absolutely. Nikia set down her pencil and turned to face him. In life? "I think I'd like to find out." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I was furious with you." Nikia's voice was steady, certain. "And I think you've done the work to become someone worthy of that love." "Are you sure?" Henry asked, reaching for her hands. "Because I need you to be completely sure." "I'm choosing you," Nikia said firmly. "I'm choosing the man who learned to braid hair for our daughter. I'm choosing the man who goes to therapy to make sure he never lets fear override love again. I'm choosing the man who proved that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work." Hope chose that moment to wake up and demand attention, interrupting their tender moment. But as they moved together to comfort their daughter, they understood this interruption was perfect. Their love story had always been about the family they were building together. 6 months later, Henry and Nikia were married again in a small ceremony in the penthouse garden, with Hope babbling happily in Nikia's arms as they exchanged new vows. "I promise to choose faith over fear," Henry said, "to fight for us rather than against my own insecurities, and to love you with the courage you deserve. I promise to be patient with your growth and honest about my needs," Nikia replied, "to build something stronger than what we lost, and to never let pride keep me from fighting for our love." As they kissed, Hope reached out and grabbed both their faces with her tiny hands, blessing their reunion. Sterling Pemberton raised his glass to Henry and Nikia, who proved that some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin again with "let's try once more, but better this time." 5 years later, Hope was a precocious kindergartner chasing fireflies in their garden. Their marriage had weathered real storms, but each obstacle had been met with honest communication and the kind of unshakable trust forged by two people who understood the cost of losing each other. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dawn had never interfered? Nikia asked as they watched their daughter play. "Sometimes," Henry admitted, "but we're better now. Better parents, better partners, better people because we had to fight our way back to each other." "So you're grateful for the heartbreak?" "I'm grateful for the healing," Henry corrected. "I'm grateful we learned that love isn't just a feeling, it's a daily choice, even when it's difficult," Hope called out from the garden, asking her parents to catch fireflies with her. "Ready?" Henry asked, offering his hand. "Always," Nikia replied, "because love, real love, always finds a way back."